Hi, everybody, and welcome back. In this set of videos, we're looking at Module 8 in our text, and we're going to be looking at some business applications in this section, particularly also focusing on Excel's function for what-if analysis. So, asking questions like, well, what would change if this happened, right? Or if I changed that one number, how would that affect everything else? So we're going to be looking at questions like that. Now, I strongly encourage you to read through this section in your text, as there's some background information and some vocabulary and business terms that you may not be familiar with. And if you're not, you definitely want to review those. So I will briefly discuss it, but then we're going to jump into the Excel portion. So again, make sure you go back and review that. So we're going to be looking at Athena cycles. And our goal here is to perform a break-even analysis of Athena 1 bicycle sales. So a type of bicycle they're going to call Athena 1, and determine the product mix that optimizes company profits among 4 Athena bicycle models. And this is something that a lot of companies really do have to think about, right? It's a fine balance between making sure we have a sales price that is profitable enough, but also not too low or not too high so that people are actually buying our product, right? It has to have a little bit of a sweet spot there, depending on our clientele. We also need to make sure that we're not overproducing, right? So that's something big that companies would have to think about, right? If we can only sell 1,000 bicycles, I don't want to make 1,500, right? I'll be having extra costs, and then I have nowhere to store the bicycles as well, or storage could be an additional cost. So there's really a lot that has to go into play between thinking about our sales price, how many items we can realistically sell, what our costs and potential revenue and so profit would be. We're going to look at what's called, your book uses CVP analysis, which stands for cost volume profit analysis. And that's a branch of financial analysis that studies this relationship between expenses, sales volume, meaning how many of those items can we sell, and then also profit. So we're going to be looking at these types of questions here. Now, in a company, there are different types of costs. So many companies have variable costs. They also have fixed costs, and some may also have mixed costs. And again, I encourage you to read through your text for more detail, but basically, your variable costs are costs that vary, from month to month, typically based on how much you produce. So there's something that changes from month to month. In this case, it's going to be our production of bicycles. So if I only produce 100 bicycles one month, that would be a different cost than if I produce 500 bicycles, right? Because I have to pay for materials and labor and things like that. So items that are changing or are based on another factor like how many we produce or how many we purchase or sell, etc. Those are called variable costs. Companies also have fixed costs though. So fixed costs do not change from month to month. An example could be something like rent, right? If you're renting a building or an office building or a factory, or you own a building, you have to pay that rent or mortgage every month, regardless of how many units you are producing. The same thing could be said for salaries, right? So you're still hiring the same people to come in, whether you're producing maybe 1,000 bikes or 1,200 bikes, right? So maybe your clientele or your employee staff doesn't have to change, but you still have to pay them whether you sell those items or not, right? So you do have some fixed costs that you need to incorporate. And then there's also mixed cost, which are costs that could be a combination of the two. And a great example of that would be employees that make commission. So an employee that makes commission could have a standard salary. So maybe they make $1,000 a week or something like that. But maybe they also get a percentage of sales. So maybe if they sell, 100 bicycles, they also get 2% of those sales, that revenue as well. So they would have their salary based on part fixed cost and part variable cost, depending on how many units they sell that month. So that would be a mixed cost example. And again, companies can have any combination of these. And of course, you could have more than one mixed cost and more than one variable cost and so on. So we usually add them all up together and group them. In our example here, we're not going to use any mixed costs. We're going to just use fixed and variable costs. So if you go to the next page here, or the next sheet, I should say, on income, it does give that breakdown of what kind of costs and revenue potential we do have here. So for instance, you have to start the number of units sold. So we are making a big assumption here, and this is in your text as well. The assumption is that Athena Cycles sells pretty much everything they produce. So they've got it down really well where they have a very strong clientele, a very loyal clientele. And if they make a product, it sells. In the real world, that may not always be the case, although that's always the goal, right? Our goal is to produce exactly what we need. But realistically, you may underproduce, in which case you have a high demand, or you may overproduce, right? And in that case, you're storing units. So we're going to assume here that Athena Cycles is basically selling everything they produce. So we are taking that, that piece out of the equation, which does make it a bit more complicated. The other thing that we have here is that Athena is currently selling this bicycle model for $1,400. So if we think about revenue, our revenue is just the number of units sold times the sale price. So you have that here, and you can see the formula is just B5 times B6. So our total revenue that we'll be bringing in from sales is $4,200,000. Under the revenue, they have the costs broken down. So Athena Cycles has different variable costs. They have a materials cost for producing the bicycles, and they also have a manufacturing cost. And these both are variable because they depend on how many units are produced. So you can see here, this 2,220,000 comes from the number of units we're producing, which is 3,000, times the material cost. And then the 630,000 comes from, again, the number of units we're producing times the manufacturing cost per unit. And then the total variable costs would be 2,850,000. Now, Athena also has fixed costs. They have salaries that they have to incorporate, and this is data that's just entered. They have shipping and distribution they have to consider. They have stocking and, again, storage, and then other miscellaneous expenses. So these would be the fixed costs associated particularly with this item. Again, we're kind of keeping it simple, just focusing on one item here. But of course, a company could have more fixed costs as well if we're talking about multiple items at once. So these fixed costs are directly related to this particular item and the people who work on creating and producing this item. So you have two costs here, right? This 2,850,000 and the 1,156,000. So there's two costs, and we have one revenue. And then what you see at the bottom here, we have those totals. So there's your total revenue. There are your two costs added in. So you have your variable cost and your fixed cost added. And then your net income is the difference between the two. So your net income, we take the revenue, that's the amount of money coming in. We take the expenses, the amount of money going out, and we subtract those two values. And what's ever left over is our profit. So for this, we're making about $193,000 profit, is the projected profit. And again, we are making some big assumptions here that we are going to sell everything that we produce, which is a pretty big assumption, and not always the case, right? So those are just a little bit of breakdown of the information that we have to start with. All right, so let's play around a little bit, and I'm going to break this into a couple of videos so it doesn't get too long, but you can obviously just play around. So if you notice here, B5 is where we have the number of units sold, and this is a value that's entered. It's not a formula. Everything else, though, except for, things like sale price, or down here are some of our fixed costs that are already pre-calculated, are formulas, right? So we're not using 3,000 in the formula, we're using B5. Same thing here with our costs. We're not using 3,000, we're using B10, and B10 is just a copy of B5. So by doing that and by using formulas as many places as possible, it allows us to play around. So one way that you can just kind of do a very basic what if analysis is to just play around with your numbers. So for instance, if we make and sell 3,000 units, our profit is about 193,000. What if I only make and sell 2,000 units though? Right? And you can see everything else updates because I've used formulas everywhere that I can. I can see how my revenue changes. I can see how my costs change and my fixed and variable costs. And then I can see now if I only sell 2,000 units, I am in the red, so I'm negative. I'm losing $250,500. And I do have, this is already pre-formatted so that you are seeing any losses in red here. Well, what if instead we made 4,000 units, right? So maybe I have a really high demand for this product. I know my clientele are going to just scoop them right up. What if I made 4,000 units and sell all 4,000? Well, if that was the case, then my profit goes up to about $643,000. So your most basic what if analysis, which requires really no tools in Excel, is to just play around with your numbers. Again, in particular, if you set everything up using formulas, you can just kind of play around and, see what happens for different values. What do we think is reasonable? Well, maybe I don't think I can sell 4,000, but I'm pretty sure I can sell 3,200 units, an extra 200. I think that's pretty reasonable. And how does that affect my profit, right? Our profit increases almost 100,000 from our original. So that's one way to just do a very basic what if analysis, is just to play around. Now, the other thing that people often look for is what's called the break-even point. And your break-even point is where your profit is $0. So basically, the amount of money coming in and the amount of money going out is exactly the same. So your revenue and your total costs are equal. You are making no money, but you're not losing any money. And that's called the break-even point. And that is a really important value for many companies to know, right? They need to know where are they going to start making and seeing a profit to see if the venture is actually reasonable, right? It may not be reasonable. If your break-even point is 10,000 bicycles, and there's no way you can possibly sell 10,000 bicycles, then you need to go back to the drawing board, right? So that's not going to work as it currently stands. So that break-even point is important. And we can find it very quickly here. So what we're going to do, all right, let me just move a couple things here. All right, so I'm going to go up here to the data feature. And in data, you do see on the right under forecast a what if analysis section. And there's different things that we can do here. So for just a very basic question of, where is the break even point? So I'm really looking for when is my net profit 0? That's what I want to know. When is the profit going to be 0? I can use the goal seek feature here. So I'm going to go ahead and click goal seek, excuse me. And then I'm going to go ahead and scroll on down. And I'm going to click cell. This is B27, excuse me. So B27 is my net income, right? And that's really what I'm focusing on. My question is, when is my net income 0? So in the second piece here, I'm going to enter my value of 0 because that would be the break-even point. I have no profit at all. And then by changing cell refers to which cell are we changing to figure out this answer. So what we're focusing on here in this particular question is how many units do we have to sell, right, to make this happen? So our changing cell is B5. That's the one that we're trying to figure out, well, how many units do I have to sell / produce to break even here? So our set cell is the income, because that's what I'm trying to figure out, right? When is my income 0? And then my changing cell is B5, because that's the number that we're playing around with. And then when I'm all set, I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK. And then it will fill in and change that value for me. If I want to cancel it, I can just cancel it out and revert back. But if I want to leave it, I would just click OK. And you'll see here that our break-even point is 2,570 units. So I need to produce and sell 2,570 bicycles in order to break even. And if you scroll down, all of these numbers update appropriately. And then again, you can see your net income is flat, it's 0. So this is how we can find our break-even point. So we do a what if analysis, we go to goal seek, and again, whatever our net profit is here, we select that cell, we set it equal to 0 particularly, and then we select the cell that we want to change and play around with. Now you could also use this for different features, right? If you don't want to do an income of 0, you could set it to anything you want. So you could say, oh, how many units do I have to sell in order to get a profit of, I don't know, 500,000? or how many units do I need to sell in order to get a profit of 200,000. So we can go ahead and really ask any question we want. So again, we're looking for that net income. Let's say I want to know, when is it going to be 250,000 instead? And I'm doing a changing cell up here of B5. So I can, again, ask whatever questions I want to. So here I'd have to sell 3,126 units to make a profit of 250,000. So our most common one is that break even, that 0 point. But again, if you have some individual values you want to play around with, we can use that goal seek feature.